as is usually the case, if you're watching this live and you can actually see me and hear me, please put something in the chat box. I really would appreciate it. Let's see, I'm supposed to have a guest today. My buddy Will is going to join me. I don't see him here yet, so I wonder where he is. I'm going to send him a message. Let's see what he's up to. The topic of the conversation today has been a year in the works, I guess, and that is the Razor Gen3 rifle scope, the 6-36x56 from Vortex. I've had this for a little while now, and I've spent a lot of time behind it. I've talked about it a good bit on my website here and there, but okay, yeah, William is signing on. Mr. Joel Dubose, excuse me, is here. Okay, we are moving along. So as soon as Will logs in, I'm going to add him to the stream. But the basic idea is that Razor Gen3 for Vortex was a substantial step up or step forward, depending on how you define it, and that was worth some careful examination. Will has had a chance to compare it to many different scopes, and his perspective is a little bit different. He's a PRS shooter. I'm more of a general purpose gun and optics guy. Okay. All right. One sec. Just trying to find. Let me make sure I send them an updated link. And we'll be off to the races. I still will. Let's see if we work it out this time. Okay. All right. Okay, I am going to put this thing on mute for just a moment while Will is joining me. Give me 1 sec. Joel says, caught up, just getting started. Yes, we're just getting started. I'm trying to get Will in here. He is learning the fine art of clicking on a link. I'm going to give him a hard time about this. And I'm doing my general introduction as people join us. But where was I? Yeah. So Razor Gen3 for Vortex was a significant step, both in terms of price, it's a $3,000 scope, and in terms of performance. I was very, very surprised when I first got my hands on it with how high quality this scope was. Not that other Vortex scopes are not high quality. They're always built to a price point, and they do well with that price point. But and they always do well with that price point. But with each successive iteration of Razor rifle scopes, the price point keeps on moving higher, and the performance has to move higher with it. It really wasn't clear to me in the beginning whether the Razor name or Vortex name could command a $3,000 price. And when I started really looking at it, it was very clearly apparent. Okay. All right, Mr. Will is here. Will, are you ready to join? Almost? Yes? I'll go with a yes. All right, buddy. I'm adding you to the stream.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, perfect.
I am even going to put on my headset so that we don't do too much echo. All right, you got a nice setup there. Screen, it says Vortex on it.
Yeah, let me get that.
Looking very professional.
Trying my best.
All right, let me see if I can. Okay, so this way we can see the whole screen. I don't know if that's a terribly good picture, but it should be fine. All right, Mr. Chris can hear us fine. All right, you invested in a nice microphone.
Sure did. Had to step up, what I was doing over here.
So after the last live stream, I gave him a prodigious hard time. Will is a good friend, so that well, to be fair, I can't say that I make fun of Will and give him a hard time because he's a friend. I do that to people who don't like me either. Don't like me as well. So I don't know. I guess you're not that special, but
Well,
I did give him a hard time about the
I'll
microphone.
gladly receive the advice.
Yeah. So here's the politically correct one here. All right. I was basically biding my time, and where I stopped as you started joining in is basically saying that Razor Gen3 was a big step up for Vortex in terms of price, and there was a big question whether the performance was there and whether the Vortex or Razor name had sufficient cachet, if you wish, to command a $3,000 price. Like, yes, you can get them discounts and all that, but fundamentally it's a $3,000 scope. And when I think about this, I think in terms of map, right? What is the minimum advertised price? Because that's generally speaking what this scope is, right? There are discounts occasionally. You call people to handshake under the table, you can get a better price. But $3,000, is the scope worth $3,000? And as I started messing with it, it became very readily apparent that it is indeed worth $3,000 and maybe more. And I can't think really of a better precision scope for $3,000.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is a lot of people will ask me, especially newer shooters, what scope should I get? What's the best bang for the buck? And that always comes down to, of course, well, what's your budget, right? That's first and foremost. And then from there, it's what's the purpose of the scope? Is it just a pure competition scope where, certain factors like length and weight and things like that don't really matter? Or is it going to be some sort of a crossover scope where maybe you'll do a hunter series or team matches, things like that? And then comes the inevitable question of, well, what's the best scope or what's the best bang for the buck? Things like that, right? And I think to everyone that means something different. If your budget is $1,500, then the best bang for the buck is going to be something other than, somebody that says, okay, my budget is $3,000. What's the best bang for my buck there? Yeah. But the astonishing thing to me about the Razor 3 that really, aside from the performance too, that I think a lot of people are overlooking is the fact that if you look, and honestly, you don't have to look very hard, but if you look when they're on sale, you can get them for sub $2,500 fairly regularly, which is absolutely insane. And the other thing too is they were handing out 30% off certificates and multiple certificates like candy almost at every PRS match last season. Vortex was. And when you use that certificate, the price comes down to like $2,100. I mean, bar none, there's not a better scope for $2,100. There's just not.
Well, I'm making a contention that for precision shooting, there's no better scope for 3,000. And we can have a discussion about that. 2,100 is just, great.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree with that because as I mentioned to a few people, the Razor Gen 3 really punches above its weight class. It punches above the $3,000 price point to me. And it's a lot closer to a $4,000 scope to me than it is to anything that's regularly at the $2,000 price mark. Some of the Burris scopes, some of the Bushnell scopes, even the Leupold Mark V is down there in the 2200, 2300. It's so many steps above those. It's a lot closer to a ZCO level, tangent level type of alpha scope, really, honestly.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with that. So let's see. So Mr. Joel has the March 10-60 and asking if it's better than the March. Well, if you do bench rest, no. If you
Correct.
do PRS, yes.
Yeah. So a 10-60 is obviously a very specialized scope and for a very specialized discipline. So the Razor 3 6-36 is a great scope. Even at 36 power, it wasn't awful, which a lot of high magnification scopes tend to be really bad in that last, I don't know, 20 to 25% of their magnification range. A lot of them, especially ones that aren't well put together, just kind of fall off a cliff. Like
Yes.
good, and then at a certain point it just tanks performance wise. And I didn't really find that with the even all the way up at 36. But for something like bench rest F class, yeah, I mean, could you take it out there if that's all you have? Yeah, sure, absolutely. Why not? But it's not going to beat something specialized like a 10-60. But you also wouldn't run a 10-60 in any type of PRS matches either.
Well, so I did compare it to a March 5-42 that I have, and we'll talk about that later. I'm just thinking, let's do this. So, guys, please put the questions in the chat box. We're going to go through all of them. First, I'd like to have a little bit of a discussion with Will about the scope. We'll talk about the different parameters. I'm going to try to kind of lay the groundwork a little bit. And then I'll let Will talk about how it compared to the scopes he had a chance to compare it with in terms of all these different myriad of parameters. And Will and I sort of speak the same language back when I used in California. We've spent a good amount of time looking through the scopes side by side together so we can kind of communicate well. I don't have to explain what I mean. He kind of knows.
Yeah.
And I've trained you well, young Padawan. Sorry, couldn't resist it.
Yeah.
Did you come prepared with the most important part?
I did not.
I did not train you well, young Padawan. Cheers.
Well, I'll have to.
All right.
I'll have to
When we meet in Vegas for shot,
yes,
we are going to rectify this.
yes.
But anyhow, so let's think a little bit about what we mean by a precision scope in this case. We are talking about general purpose precision. That means sometimes you shoot paper, sometimes you shoot plates, sometimes you're going to be shooting whatever weird-ass targets they do for rimfire competitions. You are going to cover everything from 25 yards to, I don't know, 1,000-ish yards or so. Your targets will frequently be comparatively small. They will be hard to see. They will be hidden. They will be at unknown distances. You will end up shooting from weird-ass positions, weird-ass supports. And the things that matter in a scope like this are loosely defined as optical performance, mechanical performance, and ease of use, right?
Yes.
And optical performance it can get fairly complicated, but fundamentally, when we talk about optical performance, we're talking for the most part about balance between resolution, contrast, color rendering, and distortion control. There is a variety of other small things, but they all kind of feed into these three things. Is the color reasonable? Is it warm? Is it cold? Is it natural enough, right? So, and different companies tune it a little bit different. There's a lot of personal preference there. Contrast and resolution are always in a tug of war. Scopes that are extremely well optimized for very, very high resolution often suffer in terms of contrast. And with contrast, there's also different contrast for the really bright big blocks, big features, and small ones called micro contrast. And that'll come up as we talk about this.
Yeah.
Right? And then there is a distortion control, and people genuinely underestimate it, but I have seen some scopes that looked very sharp because there was some really odd distortion. You look to them a little bit and you immediately generate this crazy eye fatigue because the image is distorted in some subtle ways. And the moment you get eye fatigue, it doesn't matter how nice the scope is, you can't see shit, basically. Okay, so that's optics. Mechanical quality, what we're talking about is really basically two things in this case. One, does the scope stay zeroed? Does it adjust consistently and accurately when you need it to? Okay, and when we're talking about ease of use, we're primarily talking about all the different controls. Are they easy enough to turn? Do you have to, you're on a nice shooting position, you need to change magnification, so you have to get up, go to your back, get a pipe wrench, hook it up to the scope, go, right? If you have to do that, it's not very user-friendly scope, right? And iBox, which is really, really critical, it's a part of this user experience, user-friendliness, if you wish. And I know there is one thing that I missed. Depth of field. How much do you have to fuck with the parallax, basically?
Yes.
Right. So that's it's part of optical quality. It should be part of optical quality. So this is generally the field. This is how I tend to think about these scopes at a higher level. When I do my tests, I drill into more detail than that. But this is basically the minimum amount of detail my anal retentive self can deal with. Right. You with me, Will?
Yes.
Right. So using this framework, I'm going to leave the floor to you. Tell us what you thought about the scope and how it did along this bevy of parameters compared to the other scopes you've compared to. I know you had a chance to look at it side by side with a bunch of them.
Yes. So first and foremost, to kind of set the lay of the land, I'm
trying to maximize you, so just give me a moment.
Okay. No worries.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah, so I had the opportunity to compare it to some of the scopes that I own, which you guys can see behind me here. A Tangent, Leupold Mark V, a Collis, that's the DLR, the newest one that they offer, 5-25, ZCO, and also a 7-35 Attacker, two Schmidt Bender PM2 5-25s, one with the locking turret, and then the other one with the classic double turn turrets, as well as a Razor 2, a Vortex Gen3 Razor, and I'm trying to think. I think that was pretty much it. And honestly, it super impressed me. So no scope is perfect, and of course, when you get to a certain threshold, I think you really start to nitpick for some of those things that are wrong or could be improved, I guess. But starting from an optical perspective, I was able to line them up all side by side in a sort of, I got a plank and put some rails on it and just mounted them all up so I could go side by side.
You've gone low tech since I moved to New Mexico. Okay.
And actually, one thing that I have that I keep in my wallet all the time is something that Ilya gave me, which is it's about the size of a business card or a credit card, but it's actually from Zeiss, and it's like a small little optical chart that's got like a little color chart on it and some resolution areas on it. And I taped that at 100 yards and just look at that through the various optics. And then the other thing that I did was I had a couple of friends of mine
hold on a
who,
second. I'm going to switch us for a moment.
Okay.
So you guys can see it. Here we go.
Yes. So it's exactly one of those. It's about the size of a credit card. So at 100 yards, it's pretty hard to see regardless of what type of scope you're using. And so I looked at it. And then the other thing that I did was I had a couple of my buddies who professionally do photography and film work and things like that look through it. But what I did was I did not tell them what colors were on that color chart, because I wanted that to be completely unknown to them before telling me what they thought the colors were and how it looked and things like that. Because if, I guess mentally, if you already know what the colors are, it's easier to pick them out because you're predisposed to what it might be. And throughout all of them, the Razor, and we tried to keep them all at 25 magnification just because that was the most fair way to do it. It's not fair to have a Tangent at 25 and then a Razor 3 at 36 and say, oh, well, I can see more. But across at 25 magnification and at 15 magnification, the Razor 3 continued to just punch above its weight class. The eye box was extremely forgiving, and we noticed that right away because when scopes are not mounted on a rifle, sometimes it can be a little tricky your first step behind it to try to find the best spot to be behind it. And that one continually was just super easy to get to. Even when I threw it on a rifle and shot matches with it, it was super easy to get through. Parallax was another thing. So Tangent has set the bar, the gold standard for parallax forgiveness, I feel. And there are other scopes that are pretty close, but for the most part, outside of, in my experience, 200 yards on a Tangent, you don't have to touch the parallax really, at least for any competitions that I've ever shot. And the Vortex Razor 3 wasn't that far off. So one that I want to compare it to is the ZCO 5-27. I call that scope parallax free at about 300 yards. And the Razor 3 was right there, like right in that 250 to 300-ish range. From there to, you know, our furthest targets at 1,000 plus, I didn't really have to touch it. It was really, really, really forgiving. We looked into some shadows to try to identify targets that were under trees and shadows and darker and harder to find and things like that. The resolution and clarity was really, really good. So I know that a lot of people right away are going to ask, I guess one of the most direct competitors is going to be the 7-35 attacker. And so the 7-35 attacker is interesting because I've always said that Nightforce, at least in the 7-35 attacker line, the pure image resolution has always been really, really good. I just personally felt like color-wise, they sometimes fell a little flat in contrast. Some of the colors didn't seem necessarily as bright. And some people could say, oh, they're more natural looking as opposed to more highlighted. But the Razor 3 compared to that one, the image resolution, and correct me if I'm using the wrong terms, but the resolution was outstanding, and it was also it kept that color and brightness and contrast.
That's contrast. What the term you're looking for is contrast.
Yeah, so it kept all of that while still maintaining really, really awesome resolution. So optically, it was very, very impressive. I would put it third and very close to second if I had to rank them in order of where I saw them. Tangent still edged it out, but the interesting thing about the comparison to the Tangent is that to really start to see some of the differences, I had to look at like 700 yards and beyond at 25 power on both scopes to really start to see, okay, the Tangent is still making out a few more details than the Razor 3. But at that level of nitpicking, neither one will ever cost you a hit or a miss in a competition or
all of that
any
was
other.
During the day, right?
I'm sorry?
All of that was during the day, right?
Yeah, so we did most of that during the day. I did do some low light testing at dusk and when the sun was going down and things like that. And it also held up pretty well in those areas as far as light gathering. The Razor 3 did. It really, and I'm not sure what the exact technical terms would be, but the light that it held on to, the darker that it got, was impressive to me.
So I'll interrupt you for just one sec. So that is basically fundamentally that's a measure of contrast. So when a scope is able to keep contrast well, it gives you ability to see color further into the low light. Okay, the way our eyes work, right? As the light goes down and everything starts getting less contrasty, your eye eventually switches to this night adapted mode where you're not really seeing color all that much. And scopes with well optimized contrast allow you to retain color vision. And our ability to see clearly is very strongly dependent on color vision, right? It allows you to see to carry this color vision further into the kind of twilight hours.
Yeah, so that was definitely something that I noticed was it was almost as if, and this might be like a slight exaggeration, but to a certain extent, it was almost like when I was looking at targets as the sun started to go down, and even at the very beginning of when the sun had completely set already, I could barely make out shapes of targets, but when I looked through the scope, I could see the targets and make out some of the colors and other details, where it was almost as if there was like a flashlight on the target when I was looking through the scope. So that was very, very impressive. I did test that throughout the different scopes to see which ones did the best in some of those conditions as well. I will say that for what the Razor 3 was built for, which would, based on weight alone, would be primarily PRS, low light performance isn't something that you would necessarily need all that often, because 99% of the matches are shot during the daytime. And so really the most challenging conditions from that perspective would just be super overcast or targets that are in shadows, under trees and in brush and things like that. But where you would encounter targets in the dark or maybe in a hunting scenario, I don't know that you would necessarily have a 45-ounce scope on your rifle in the first place.
Well, if you're trying to get in shape, that's not a bad way to carry a 45-ounce scope on you.
Yeah.
Anyhow, Joel, thank you. So one thing that you will see in a PRS type scenario, precision shooting scenario, is how does it do with difficult air. So twilight is one example of difficult air, right? Another example of difficult air is a mirage.
Yes.
Right? Another example of difficult air is when you're looking into the sunset, right? And you're picking up flare reflections, all sorts of other weird shit. We like to think that everybody builds scope for PRS, and some people do. But for example, if you talk to the guys at, I don't know, let's say Tangent Theta, if you talk to the guys at Tangent Theta and you ask them who they built the scope for, well, they will flat out tell you they were not building it to the price point. They were trying to make the best scope they can, and their target audience is what they call a professional marksman. That's basically a civilized Canadian way of saying, sniper special operations, people who shoot other people for a living, hopefully infrequently, etc. And that means any possible type of condition. And I can assure you that while Vortex was looking at the competition community very, very, very carefully, they, I'm sure, had somewhere in the back of their mind there may be some other applications here and there. So low light performance is something that every scope manufacturer pays attention to, even though it's not that critical in a competition scenario.
Yeah, and so it's interesting that you bring that up, because we've seen the Razor 3 offered with a few different reticles, but the 7D, which is their primary self-made Vortex reticle, was the one that I got to test out, and I actually really enjoyed that reticle. It was a good revision, I would say, from the reticles that were in the Razor Gen 2 and even the AMG, where some parts of the crosshairs were a little bit too thick on some of those. For example, the 0.5 mil marking on your windage, that hash was just it was just a little bit too thick. But overall, the designs were always pretty well done. But the 7D was great, and so for the few competitions that I ran it in, I ran it with a trigger cam on the back of it. And for those of you that have never used the trigger cam, it sucks up a pretty decent amount of your eye relief. I'd say probably at least a half inch, maybe a full inch off of your eye relief. And the trigger cam casts like a dark tint over the optic. And so with different optics that I've used the trigger cam on, it can kind of be a pain in the ass to kind of get behind the scope in an awkward position on like a barricade or in between a tree or something like that. I didn't have any of those problems with the Razor 3. I didn't even notice the dark tint when I put the trigger cam on there. It really handled all of that very, very well. And I think that speaks to how forgiving the iBox was. I will say that's something that I wanted to mention is, to me, that iBox, bar none, is the best iBox of any scope I've tested to date. It to me, it was better than my Tangent. It was better than my ZCO, better than the Collis DLR, better than the Mark V. That iBox, and all of them I tested in various PRS positions, if you want to call it that, barricades, ladders, tank traps, rooftops, all that, at about 15 to 17 power, which is a normal magnification range for shooting those types of competitions. I mean, you could almost put your head in like any kind of weird retarded position and you'll find the scope. Like you'll find the reticle and it'll be there. You know, you could even do one of these and you'd probably find it. It's
the most remarkable thing though is that many Mr. Boom countries here. Good evening. So one of the interesting things is that most rifle scopes, even the ones with fairly forgiving eye boxes, really tighten up at high magnifications because the exit pupil gets smaller. That's just the physics of it. Absolutely remarkably, although the exit pupil does get smaller, eye box does tighten up on 36 power. And remember, so mine mostly sits on a very, very accurate 22, very accurate rimfire. I've had it on other scopes, but it mostly sits on my rimfire trainer because I shoot that thing the most, probably of all my precision guns. But even on freaking 36, when I'm trying to find some target, the size of your foreskin at 80 yards, I can easily get behind the scope, even from fairly contorted and weird shooting positions. Even on highest magnification, the scope is user-friendly. That was arguably, for me, was one of the more remarkable things about it.
Yes, and so speaking of rimfire, another thing that I really loved was the 10-yard parallax. Honestly, I loved that minimum 10-yard parallax because another thing that, and maybe for some people this doesn't really matter much, but for me, I tend to do a fair bit of dry firing, and so it just makes it that much easier to dry fire and that much more forgiving, especially once you put one of the like a DFAT device on the objective end. But I'll be honest, I backed up all the way across my living room and I almost didn't need it. Like I had almost enough room that when I was looking at my dry fire target, if I had opened the sliding door and put my dry fire target in the back, in the little patio in the back.
Just for the record, guys, Will lives in California, and if he's easily able to do dry fire practice inside his living room, he's got a big living room.
Well, the other fun part about that is that it better be in my living room, because if I get caught with that in the backyard by somebody else, oh, you might not see me on a live cast again.
Oh, then I'm sure we can arrange to sneak in a webcam into prison.
Yeah, well, it'll be one of those, huh? Inside the birthday cake.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. But on a more serious note, so the Razor does have legitimate 10-yard parallax on 36 power. If you go to lower magnification, there is actually enough depth of field to look at comparatively close distances. I mean, actually, I haven't tested on 6 power. I can see in a reasonable amount of detail. Hold on. All right. Okay, on 6 power, I can see reasonable amount of detail at about 6-7 yards.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely incredible. And so I think for any type of NRL 22 match or anything like that, for a long time, the 7-35 attacker was the cream of the crop for any kind of rimfire competition and rimfire shooting, because you can take full advantage, provided mirage and other things like that don't factor in. But from a recoil perspective, you could absolutely shoot at 35 power all day on on a 22, or even air guns that are getting really, really popular now. But with this Razor 3 and the things that I felt that it offered over the 735, I think the Razor 3 is the best rimfire scope on the market, period. I know I do think overall the Tangent is a better scope, but because the Tangent minimum parallax is 50 and not 10, I think that puts it a little bit lower on the list for me on a rimfire specifically. But I mean, the Razor 3, to be able to go to 36 magnification and legitimately parallax down to 10 yards is really, really impressive. Really impressive.
It's a very fair point. Okay, so let's see. So you looked at it next to Tangent, Z-Comp, Colors DLR, Mark V, Attacker. As far as overall optical performance, how do you rank these?
So overall, I would say in optical my usage, first was still the Tangent. I feel like just overall it gives the most pleasing experience behind the eye, and this is something that I spent a lot of time with. This isn't something that I just kind of did on one afternoon at 1 p.m. and didn't do it again. I tried to really, really nitpick it. Second would still be the ZCO for me, and a very close third, almost tied at second, would be the Razor 3. It was very, very close to the ZCO, and that's what I've told a lot of people is, honestly, that scope is a lot closer to ZCO Tangent level than it is to Mark V level. And I'm not trying to, say that the Mark V is a bad scope, but they need to do a good number of improvements to really compete with whatever their next scope is. They need to do a good amount of improvements to compete with the Razor 3. Because
which Mark V did you look at? 5 to 25 or 7 to 35?
The 5 to 25 I have here. Yeah, and so I try to keep the magnification ranges as comparable as possible. I didn't have an opportunity to look through a 7 to 35, and I don't know anyone that owns a 7 to 35 personally that I could borrow one
you
from.
and I looked at it together quite a long time ago.
So. Yeah. So I wasn't able to put them side by side. But I mean, even then, from everyone that I've spoken to, the 7 to 35 Mark V isn't that drastically different from the 5 to 25.
No, it's very, very close.
Yeah. So after that, I would say the Collis DLR is fourth, and I actually do like the DLR quite a bit. I was not a fan of the original 5 to 25i. And I know that you also
well, you and I crapped all over it, and Collis sort of just stopped talking to me completely.
Yeah, so I do think that they did a much better job with the DLR. The turrets are the Collis, I feel, has always had good feeling turrets, but I do love the fact that they did 10 mils per turn. The field of view, when I put my trigger cam on the back and I took still pictures at 600 yards of targets to compare field of view across all the scopes, the field of view was larger on the DLR than the original 5 to 25.
Correct.
And I really like it. I still think that it's priced a bit high. If they could bring that price point down to sub 3,000, I think it could really be a competitor. But at 3,500, that's the main thing holding it back is just it's the price, and it always has been. And then finally, you have the Mark V down below.
Where does the Attacker sit compared to Collis?
So the 7 to 35 Attacker, if we're not talking price, if price is not a factor in the discussion, I liked the DLR better. I felt like it was a little bit brighter, I felt, and the colors popped a little bit more to me than the way the Attacker resolved really well. But again, some of the colors just kind of fell flat to me. But now you got to factor in the price point, And
well, aren't they priced very similarly?
they are priced similarly, but the difference is that you can find attackers on sale for a lot cheaper. They're kind of like the Vortex, where like if you buy them brand new, I think they're like $3,800, but I can find a 7 to 35 attacker on sale for like $3,000.
Yeah, for $3,000, I always thought attacker would be a very, very nice scope.
Yeah, so for that price, it's very nice, and especially if you qualify for any type of first responder military discount, Nightforce does a pretty substantial discount. So that's kind of the tough part when recommending these scopes is like, well, okay, but honestly, overall, I would still spend my money on a Razor 3 over those two. And then the Schmidt PM2s were interesting for me to take a look at, right? Because it's a very old design. It's been around for
You're talking about the 5 to 25.
Yes, the PM2 5 to 25, the classic. I looked at two of those. My buddy has two of those. And I mean, that design's been around for what, probably like 20 years?
Almost.
Yeah. And it really still holds its own against today's top scopes. It really does. Now, has it fallen off? Is it the top dog? It's not the top dog anymore, so it's fallen from number one, but it hasn't fallen far. I would say that I would actually put the Schmidt at 4, behind the Razor 3.
Okay.
And part of my problem with Schmidt is one, their pricing. Again, they've really just honestly, to a certain extent, priced themselves out of the market for a large majority of people. And the other thing is, so full disclosure, I have not gotten a chance to look at their new 6 to 36 scope, but for the 5
it's
to
not
20,
in production yet. They're only going to start making them in any quantities in Q1.
Okay. So strictly speaking, with the PM2 5 to 25, the gold standard, old classic, old reliable, they really haven't done anything to update the design on that in almost 20 years. And I think that has really started to show how long in the tooth it is. I know for a lot of people, the illumination knob tumor is somewhat of an issue.
Well, they already fixed that. There is now a side focus illumination.
Yeah. But in terms of like a lot of the ones that are already out there,
yeah, they all have the tumor.
Yeah, and I know for some people it becomes a mounting issue depending on what types of rings you're using. I also know that some people didn't like it if they're left-handed, things like that, so they got them removed. But the image quality and clarity, and then I know tunneling was, on those scopes was something that a decent amount of people also complained about. But it really has aged like fine wine, that scope. And if I wouldn't necessarily say anything bad about it, other than I just think it needs a total refresh on a lot of the design features and things like that. But it looks like they'll address most of that with the 6 to 36 that they're coming out with.
I hope so. So I'm not a huge fan of the 3 to 27 and 5 to 45 designs. I like the old 5 to 25 better,
Yeah.
optically. And 6 to 36, a couple of prototypes I've seen looked promising, but until I see production scopes, I would not make too many assumptions there, to be honest. We just don't know.
So I would definitely put, and another thing was, up until recently, the reticle choices in Schmidt were just honestly not great. Now they have the Grid 2, which is a really well done reticle, but that's only been in the last 3 years, I believe, that they've had that.
Yeah, and a little bit more 4, but
4,
yeah.
okay.
But I do like that reticle quite a lot. So that's one of my favorites modern reticles.
Yes, absolutely. And so that's really well done. But again, it took them almost 15 years to come out with that.
Hold on, something here needs to be addressed. So generally, I'm glancing at the comments, and we'll address them all later. But these are fighting words. Wow, you understand color. Didn't know that you were an artist. Take that back. Take that back. I know where you live. I can find you. All jokes aside, so this is actually an important thing about color. Sorry for the interruption, Will.
Oh, no problem.
Color is, everybody thinks that color is for artists. Looking at color is for artists. Painting is for artists. Controlling color and rendering color correctly in optical systems is a huge deal. I used to develop movie cameras and broadcast cameras and stuff like that. And I'm telling you, there is a term color science. It really is a science. Doing color the right way is hideously complicated. And that's one of the reasons why there's so much difference in all this business with how different lenses, rifle scopes, render color, how well they carry this color rendering into different lighting conditions, how well they maintain color rendering in presence of flare, stray light, and things like that. It is a seriously, hideously complicated problem to solve. The equipment to measure color correctly is expensive. Well, we'll make some of it. That's part of my day job. And we will make equipment to simulate different types of colors, color schemes, and things like that coming in to see what goes into an optical system, how it looks when it comes out. It's really, really not straightforward. The reason we keep on talking about color so much is that to see things well and clearly, our brains rely on color rendering to a remarkable degree. I hear this argument from shooters all the time. Oh, what do I care? I'm not a bird. I don't give a shit about color. You're wrong. You really do. Because when color is wrong, you can't see shit.
Yeah.
Right. Rent off.
Yeah. No. And you know, I think one of those things is, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but from my understanding, that color would also play into the way that contrast looks, so that, let's say you're shooting a target that it's gray steel, the steel's not been painted at all, and it's, you know, in a shadow under a tree. If you don't have good color, it's going to be one hell of a time trying to find that thing.
Yeah, so the rendering of this subtle contrast is awful. Or imagine you're trying to look at something that's in a forested area, in a field, something like that, right? And when looking at grass, when looking at leaves, the reason why they don't all look completely the same to you is there are these small, subtle variations of green, 28,000 shades of green. And if your optical system is not rendering them well, it'll all look like one monochrome thing. If it does render them well, the image will have this almost palpable texture. When I remember when Will and I were doing our regional, one of my high-end tactical tests a long time ago, 4 or 5 years ago, we had a bunch of scopes on a tripod and we're looking at distant plates through a little bit of mirage. It's what's it, 600 yards, 650, whatever it was.
Yeah.
Right. And what we were looking at is bullet impacts on these plates that were really beat up. They were not repainted in my lifetime, probably. Okay. And when you were looking at that through a little bit of the mirage, if your scope did not have good rendering of this color tonalities, small color variations, you had no idea. Okay. And that's where, for example, it was one of the things where Tangent at the time, it was before Razor Gen3, kind of stood out from the field a little bit, because looking through the mirage, you could really see stuff, right? The fact that now, at a lot less money, Razor Gen3 can do it almost as well, not quite as well, almost as well, is just remarkable.
Yeah, 1000%. And to speak even to that point, talking about that day, and I still have it too. It's downstairs, but it really popped even more on the Hensoldt Spotter 60, which I have. And it's funny because I went to the I was at Angelus doing this comparison with all these scopes, looking at those same 600-yard plates, and literally some of the defining points that I was using to really figure out which scopes could resolve better than others were the bullet impacts on those plates, and even the pockmarks of the impacts that had been painted over already. And you can really see, you know, so for example, I'd take the Tangent at 25 power, and okay, I can see like there's been some hits here, there's been some hits there that got painted over. You can start to see some of the dents in the steel. And then you take something like the Razor Gen 2, for example, and I can see a red plate. And it's like it looks really flat. And you know, if there's a fresh bullet mark on it, yeah, sure. But any of the ones that have been painted over, I mean, good luck. You know, it was very, you really pretty much couldn't see the ones that were already there, and nowhere close to the same amount of detail. And that progression followed through all of them. You know, I'd take the Leupold Mark V, 25 powers, same plate of steel, and I'd look and look and look, and you can pick up little hints of it, but not the way that you could with the Tangent or with the ZCO or even the Razor 3, which again just really, really impressed me. I'd go back and forth, and then at one point I just found myself going back and forth from the Tangent to the Razor 3, to the Tangent to the Razor 3, to the Tangent to the Razor 3, and just saying, man, honestly, and I love my Tangent, I really do, but I'm having one hell of a time finding, you know, $1,500 worth of difference here. I really am. Like,
it's a really interesting. So there, I put a comment up on the screen just to clarify, because this comes up a lot. Isn't there a scientific way to evaluate the quality of the glass? Yes, there is. And if you really want to do it very, very well, get some cash together. It will be in 6 figures. They don't start with one, and I'll build you one. That's one of the things I do for my day job. We build these things to scientifically evaluate the image quality of various imaging systems. Yeah, absolutely, they do exist. I see them every day. But
yeah,
interpreting the results of that is not trivial.
Yeah, and really quickly, I would just like to say, obviously, I don't have access to any of that type of equipment. So, but if one of you guys wants to sponsor it and send it my way, by all means, give Ilya the money and have
just
him
all
drop
money. I'll build it. I'll send it to Will. No problem.
Yeah, just you know,
and then you're gonna pay me a lot of money to train you how to use it.
Yeah, I'll still have to send him all the results and have him decipher it for me. It'll probably look like Egyptian to me, but
look. So once again, one more interruption. One of the reasons when I started doing this a long time ago, I would take a scope, put it up on some equipment, start talking about it a little bit, and I realized that translating the results into something that makes sense to people is really not straightforward. And then another thing I realized is that if you're trying to look at scope performance in an absolute way, it becomes really, really tricky. Very difficult to figure it out. If I look at them differentially, meaning side by side, I can tell you how they differ without a ton of equipment. I still use a few things here and there if I really want to. But with a calibrated eyeball and being very, very careful, looking at things side by side, you can figure out, okay, one is better than the other. So everything that Will and I is talking about here is differential in nature. We're trying to compare multiple scopes, tell you how they compare, so that you can make an educated purchasing decision. Let's say I put it on a rifle scope tester. I run it through all the different distortions, aberrations, resolution, contrast, color, transmission, all sort of stuff. And I give you this huge stack of numbers. How do you use that to figure out whether you want to buy this scope or not?
Right.
Again, it's intellectually interesting, but it's not very actionable data. What we're trying to do here is give you guys some actionable information, how these scopes compare to us. And we are at this stage fairly educated observers, right? And armed with that, maybe it'll help you. It'll help save you some money. That's basically what this is all about.
Yeah, and I think, to Ilya's point, a lot of that will come down to real world usage of these scopes, because again, you know, Ilya can take all these scopes and quantifiably measure a lot of the differences in image quality and other things like that. But how does that translate in use case, whether you're out, you know, backpacking, you know, to a sheep hunt or elk or coos deer or something like that, or whether you're shooting, you know, a PRS stage, 90 seconds, 10 positions, 10 targets, or are you shooting an NRL hunter match or some sort of a team safari match or a sniper competition where you're hiking for miles and then shooting and then hiking more miles and then shooting, or if you're just, you know, at a square range having fun, and all you're carrying is your rifle from your car to the bench. All those different things add up to the user experience of a scope. And so I feel like a decent amount of that does come into play as well, because even if the image is great, but mechanically, if the scope is not pleasant to use, whether the turrets are mushy or the the magnification ring is too tight or the parallax is finicky, you're not going to want it. You're not. And some people have more patience to mess with some of that stuff than others. But again, depending on the use case, do you really want mushy turrets when, you know, you've got buck fever and you're staring at an elk, you know, 300 yards away, and you're like, man, I got to make this shot, and you can't. The turrets are so mushy, you can't tell if you're dialed on 3.5 or 3.7. I mean, you know, all that comes into play as well. So there are ways to definitely measure some of that, but then there are intangibles too that definitely have to be considered in the recommendations that we try to give people.
Okay, since you mentioned turrets, I'll say my piece about optical quality, and then we'll go on to the mechanical stuff. I did put this another comment on here that that is important, and that comes up all the time. People do this all the time on different forums. I want to know the class of glass the factories are getting for their various models. Unless you really know how glass is classified, and you might, for all I know, I don't know who you are, right? You really don't. You don't care. Honestly, you don't care. That's one of the reasons I'm not, when I talk about this, I don't say how good the glass is, unless I slipped up. I talk about the image quality. You care about what kind of image quality a rifle scope delivers to your eye. What kind of glass goes in there, what exact grade and all that, from a user perspective, is completely irrelevant. It's not like there is the high class and low class and middle to high class. No. When they do a rifle scope design, they specify the exact type of glass with exact specific performances that's used for every lens element, right? This whole business, oh, this one has wonderful glass, and this one, or my favorite was always, what was that moron, Philip?
Yes,
who
with the shot.
always insisted that the glass had to come from SHOT, otherwise it wasn't good. Well, SHOT catalog has, I don't know, a few thousand different types of glass melts, right? And only a few of them are going to be used for rifle scopes. It's a nonsensical statement. Philip was functionally retarded, so we couldn't convince him otherwise. But is that the politically correct way to say functionally retarded?
Probably not, but we'll roll with it.
Okay, that's fair. Okay. If you really dig and you ask, and when people don't have anything worthwhile to say, they start spouting what kind of amazing glass was used in a rifle scope. 28 different versions of extra low dispersion glass, or pure fluoride crystal, or fluoride glass, or whatever else. Fundamentally, all of that makes for nice marketing because it sounds sophisticated. And it's very easy for rifle scope marketing people to talk about, because most of these people have no idea what any of this stuff is, right? But it sounds scientific, it sounds impressive. How good does it look to your eye? What kind of an image does it deliver? That's what ultimately what matters. Okay. So before we move on to the mechanical quality, I didn't have a chance to compare Gen 3 to as many scopes as Will has, but the two high-quality scopes I have here are the March 5-42x56 and the Tangent 5-25x56, and I've had these side by side quite a lot. I had a good number of less expensive scopes that Razor Gen 3 pretty much beats all of them handily. The one that I really wanted to do a comparison with was Burris XTR Pro, which should be really, really good for $2,200, but I haven't had a chance. I hope to still do that. Generally, I do plan to do a more proper comparison of the new designs. I want to get my hands on the new Schmidt 6-36. There's going to be a new element scope that should be a little bit cheaper. That's going to be interesting to see. And I have the Tangent in the March. I think Will is correct. Gen 3 is not better optically than the Tangent, but it's close. Is it better optically than March 5-42? Yes and no. On high magnifications, March outresults. March is a better scope for shooting paper. But the Razor Gen 3 is an easier scope to get behind. And it is a better corrected scope in terms of distortion. So March has very, very wide field of view, even wider than the Gen 3, but the edges are not as well corrected. March is all about the center field performance, and in that regard, it is really quite remarkable. Depending on what you shoot and how you shoot, you may prefer March if you shoot more paper, and you will probably prefer the Gen 3 if you shoot more plates. Largely on the strength of really good distortion correction at the edges, and on the strength of the better depth of field. Depth of field is a big deal. Depth of field defines how much you have to putz around with the parallax as you transition from distance to distance. I'm hearing some echo. Will, do you hear echo?
I do not on my end.
Interesting. Guys, do you hear echo? Okay, I'll continue. If you do, let me know. Okay, so where was I? Yeah, depth of field, if you're trying to transition from target to target fairly quick, is a huge deal. And traditional tangent is the best at it. Z-comp and the 5-25 Schmidt were the two closest to it. And the Gen 3 is very much in the running there with ZCO and with the old Schmidt. And everybody else is just not as good in terms of depth of field and ease of use. And in terms of getting behind it, this iBox is generally very difficult to optimize for scopes that have wide field of view. So Chris is saying he's hearing a little bit of echo. Okay, Will, would you mute yourself for just a moment? I want to see if that's what's doing it. Okay, so I'm going to talk for a little bit. Tell me if you can still hear echo. So one of the amazing things, okay, I stopped hearing echo, so it was probably somehow going through Will's headset. You're probably a gamer or something, your hearing is not good. Maybe you need to turn the sound down in your headphones a little bit. Where was I? Yeah. Wide field of view and forgiving iBox, like contrast and resolution, are in a perpetual tug of war. If the scope has very wide field of view, it is generally harder to make it forgiving to get behind. That is, when I did my original first take on the Gen 3, I talked about it, and I compared it to the Z-comp. And that's, I don't know if you guys heard, I had a falling out with ZCO last year at SHOT Show. They tried to rip me a new one for not being nice enough to their scopes. And that actually came from when I was talking about the Razor Gen 3, because to me, when I looked at the Razor Gen 3, I thought it was going after the Z-comp, because one of the strengths of the ZCO was this incredible user friendliness, really nice eyepiece. The image looks huge. It's very, very easy to get behind. Hell, Will is a ZCO sponsored shooter. ZCO makes excellent scopes. Whether they like me or not, it doesn't make the scopes any better or any worse, right? And Razor Gen 3 goes after that same, in many ways, paradigm, except ZCO throttled their field of view a little bit to give you that forgiving iBox. Tangent iBox is less forgiving than ZCO, but the field of view is wider. March iBox is less forgiving than ZCO, but the field of view is wider. Razor Gen 3 iBox is more forgiving than ZCO or Tangent or March or Attacker or whatever, and the field of view is wide. Mm-hmm. Very similar field of view to the Tangent, slightly narrower than the March, but better corrected than the March. Okay. The most amazing thing about all this user friendliness of the Razor Gen 3 is they managed to pull it off without compromising depth of field, without compromising field of view, without compromising resolution, without compromising contrast. Doesn't mean it has the best resolution. March is better, Tangent is better, Z-comp is better. Not by much, but better. Doesn't mean it has the best contrast, but it's close. And it has that incredibly forgiving iBox, and it focuses down to 10 yards. The Gen 3 optically has no apparent weaknesses. It's not necessarily the best in any of the categories other than the iBox, but it's not weak at any of them. And I held this review back by a year because I really want to spend some time with it. And I always have to be concerned that because I get all these scopes from manufacturers, now they loan me scopes to play with, I always get a little bit concerned that they send me something cherry-picked. And when I received this scope, it was just before it was released. And I went and talked to my buddy over there. Says, okay, did you put this on the MTF machine? I go, yeah. How did it rank Well, he goes, it's only one I had. I wanted to send you a better one. This is about mid-pack. I say, yeah, maybe he's bullshitting me. It so happens that I get to visit Vortex quite a bit. Last time I was there, they had this whole cart of Razor Gen3 6-36 scopes. And I wanted to look at the turrets. It was a turret controversy. We'll talk about it in a moment. But I also looked through them, quite a few of them, and looked at the materials. My scope that he sent me is indeed mid-pack, right? And I looked at, Jesus, how many were there? 40, 50 scopes. Spent quite a few hours looking through them. And it's quite consistent. Field of view is consistent, eye box is consistent, resolution is consistent, contrast is consistent. There's always sample variation, right? But there are no apparent weaknesses. And I've looked at more of this than anybody outside of Vortex, and it's not close, right? So Mr. Gabriel says, if you're using a Razor Gen 3 at 10 yards on an air rifle, you may have too much money. So 10 yards is mostly for dry practice, but modern fancy air rifles, price-wise, get pretty close to PRS custom rifles. So modern air guns are amazing, and they deserve amazing scopes. If you don't believe me, I'll bring Tyler Patner back on in January or February. Do you know Tyler?
Yeah. I do not. I do not.
Yeah, you guys should talk. You speak the same language.
I would definitely be interested in that. And just briefly, not to go on a huge tangent, but air rifle competitions in general have gotten absolutely just out of this world, even in money. So they have an annual competition, the Rocky Mountain Air Rifle Club or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Long story short, a buddy of mine, Boyd Linder, he won first place in one of the categories, $25,000.
Yep. It's much faster growing than PRS. Air rifle 100%. Stuff is remarkable. I'm thinking of picking up the new FX Pantera, and if I do, there's a really good chance that Gen 3 is going to go on that.
Yeah, I saw that today. I got an email for that Pantera today, and I was thinking about, because so that Rocky Mountain annual competition, there's over $100,000 up for grabs in the various disciplines for air rifle, and you can enter as many disciplines as you want. So I mean, nobody's done it, but if you were to win every category, you could walk out there with $100,000. I mean.
Yeah, good luck. Those guys are good. I mean, you're a good shot, Will. You're much better than I am. I know a bunch of good air gunners. I mean, and they are good air gunners, are good center fire shooters also, right? But I mean, those guys are seriously good. I shoot FX Impact quite a lot.
Yeah.
And it's easily sub MOA at 100 yards if I can read the wind. I mean, it's not any less accurate than my accurate rimfires. The new FX Pantera is designed to shoot slugs. It's a 300-yard competition level air gun. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah. So they're cranking out crazy stuff, and I like you said, I would not be surprised to see a large dominance of Razor Gen 3s on serious air gun competitors, and air gunners are also competing in NRL 22 because they have that as a category, and so you know. Yeah, you're still not quite as good at distance as a 22, but it's not far off, and they're going to get there pretty soon.
Slugs, it's not that far off.
They're going to get there pretty soon.
Yeah, I mean, and you also have to keep in mind, right? So if you live in California, who do I know who lives in California? Oh, yeah, that's right.
Present and accounted for.
Exactly. So you can get an air gun in the mail. You can get a suppressor for an air gun in the mail.
Yes.
All right. So when I lived in California, it is illegal to shoot air guns in your backyard. I did a lot of practice with a suppressed air gun in my backyard when I lived in California because nobody could see or hear me, right? I basically set up the target outside, opened the sliding door, did most of my shooting from inside the house, all the positional stuff, everything, and it was quiet enough when nobody gave a rat's ass.
Yeah.
So that was air guns are kind of a big deal. And Gabriel goes, I think I've been owned. Welcome to the club, because I started out thinking the same thing about air guns as you do.
Yeah, we've all been there. When I first heard that NRL was opening up an air gun category, I kind of said to myself, what kind of an idiot would go out there with an air gun against 22s? And I was definitely taken aback and very surprised.
Yeah, Gabriel, the regulatory situation is the main reason I can see for that kind of setup. So we'll move on to the mechanical stuff in a moment. I'll go on a political tangent for a bit. The way gun laws are going, if you can afford it, everybody should have a high quality air gun. I ordered once in a mail and I received a 50 caliber air gun that shoots 425 grain slugs at about 850, 900 foot per second. I can hunt pigs with it, deer, whatever I want. It is suppressed. Nobody knows I have it. Didn't have to go through the FFL. None of the oppressive government agencies know I have it. I have a 25 caliber precision air gun. It'll take down a coyote quite comfortably. I have a semi-automatic Leshy 2 25 caliber air gun that I can go take an AR class with if I want. And one charge of the cylinder gives me, I think, 25, 30 shots, something like that. It is semi-automatic with AR type grip and everything. I can use it for home defense if I want. It's available in 30 cal as well, right? And nobody knows you have it. It's never gone through an FFL. Am I being paranoid? Yeah. Am I wrong? No. I already grew up through one large country collapse in my formative years. Was a collapse of Soviet Union. It's not going to happen here, but if you are concerned about what our esteemed government is doing, you should have an air gun, a nice one, with a reason, not 17 caliber, 25, 30 caliber, and shoot it, and put a nice optics on it, and get competent with it.
Yeah,
it's a different world, guys, and
it really is.
Something that our government has not yet figured out that they can regulate. So use the opportunity.
Yeah. And I will say that two of the biggest categories in that Rocky Mountain Air Rifle Challenge is big bore, which is 50 cal, and then the 25 cal category. So if you got two accurate air guns in either one of those cals, take your chances, man.
Yeah, I have both. My basic problem is that I'm a horrible shot. So gear is not really a problem for me. It's skills. Okay, I'll do another disclaimer, right? So I don't suffer from any humility, false or otherwise. It just so happens I hang out with people who are really good shots. Compared to people who are not as good as Will, I'm good friends with David Tubb, compared to people who are not really, really good, I'm actually a fairly decent shot. But in any serious competition, I have no chance of placing anywhere. But generally speaking, I can shoot, I can tell when a gun is accurate, and modern air guns are just impressive, just absolutely impressive. Okay, I think we've exhausted the air gun issue. We've exhausted the optical issue. We talked about iBox. We talked about user friendliness a little bit. We kind of lumped it all in, which I think is all right. And let's talk a little bit about mechanical quality. We can touch on the turret controversy, stuff like that. I'll kind of let you take the field, and then I'll fill in the blanks as we go along.
Yeah, so the Razor 3 that I received was a demo model. Was it cherry picked or mid pack? I have no idea. It's the only Razor 3 that I've spent time behind, so I didn't have the luxury like Ilya of seeing a bunch of them. So I don't know, where mine ranked. I would hope that it was just kind of a average. You can grab it and get one exactly like it off the shelf sample, because I think that's the best way to test it. The controls were really nice. So I'm partial to locking diopters. The Razor 3 is not a locking diopter, but what I do like that they did is they actually put graduation marks on the diopter. So I actually really like that because it gives you a better reference point. Now, I know a lot of people, it's like a set it and forget it type of thing, and then they'll put some like electrical tape or some sort of tape around it, stuff like that. But I actually really like witness marks like what Ilya is showing there. So you can actually quantifiably see where you're at, and I can remember it. I can write it down if it ever gets moved or bumped, or if somebody else wants to borrow it and I need to set it back. I have a place where I can set that. So that was really nice. The magnification ring is also very nice, but you know, Vortex being Vortex, they always include little odds and ends in all of their scopes, or at least their higher end ones. So they give you a throw lever and a nice one from Switch View, an aluminum throw lever.
Quick interruption. Mr. Gabriel, who gave us so much entertainment, has to go. Thank you, sir, for chiming in, and Merry Christmas as well.
We appreciate you. Thank you.
Okay.
So I threw the magnification lever on there. Did I need to? No, but it came in the box with the scope, so I mean, might as well. And so I think that that's a nice touch. Forward of that, in the saddle area, is where there's a lot of as Ilya said, controversy and issues. So the scope that I received, like I said, is the only one that I got to look at and spend a large amount of time behind. And my turrets were not bad, but they were probably the worst part of the whole scope. Now, I'm not trying to say that they're the worst turrets ever, but the scope is just that good that honestly, the turrets were probably the worst part. And in that would be specifically the elevation and windage turrets in how they feel and how they sound. So I felt like that was a really good opportunity to zero in and compare it directly to the Razor Gen 2, because obviously this is supposed to be the next step above that and sort of the graduation of that. And I actually thought the sound and tactile feel of the Razor 2 turrets were better than my Razor 3. And I had a few guys also say that when I had them twist the turrets on both next to each other, they said the similar feeling in what I saw. So that was something that I didn't like, and I actually wrote back to them that was something that I felt could be improved. I have seen now that they have improved the turrets, or at least you can send your scope back to get the turrets improved. I'm not sure if they're just doing that off the bat now, but
let me interrupt for a moment. So once again, I went and had a chance to look at several dozen of them recently after all this sort of stuff. So Will's scope that Will looked at, if it was a pre-production, and mine is a very first small production batch, were pretty good. Then the first large production batch, as it always happens, not always, often happens when you try to do something in large quantities, had a lot of variation in it, and then I tightened it up. I looked at the new spec turrets, once again, several dozen of them from different lots, and they were excellent. They were substantially better than the turrets in mine, and I thought mine was pretty good. So
okay, and so that was something that I noted in my Razor 3 review, was that if you purchase a Razor 3 and you don't like the feel of your turrets, contact Vortex, and they seem to have a way to improve the feel. I also ran into some people that said that they were able to get Vortex to disable the locking feature, which was, I thought, pretty interesting, because now if you're one of those people that has, you know, complained about, oh, I don't want locking turrets on my scopes, well, they can apparently disable that for you too. I obviously did not have the opportunity to test that either, but I think that that's pretty cool, and especially that they were able to do it that fast.
So yeah, well, if you said it and you're not happy about the turret, I basically just replaced the turret assembly. I pulled a comment up here from Matthew Coriarty. Parallax knob is way off for me on the Gen 3, and I wish the user could simply set the knob where they wanted. So if your eyepiece is adjusted correctly, which is a big if for a lot of people, and your parallax knob is still off, you can send it to them, and they'll fix it for you if it matters. Mine is dead on, but I spend a lot of time putzing around with the eyepiece. If the eyepiece is set incorrectly, the parallax is going to be off. They are related in a way. So you want to, I don't generally care if the hash marks line up, but if everything is set up correctly, they should, and on mine they do. So consider talking to Vortex and after you mess with the eyepiece a little bit.
Yeah, and so for me, mine also lined up pretty close, but again, the scope in general was so forgiving on parallax that honestly, if they didn't line up exactly, I probably wouldn't have noticed anyway. Because it's not a scope that you really have to mess with the parallax that much. And another feature that the Gen 3 retained that I actually like, and I believe that Vortex is the only one that does it. Now, is it a feature that gets used a lot? No. And that's fine too. But the locking illumination, like you can actually lock it. I actually really like that feature. But is it something that you'll be using a lot? Most people probably not, but I do like that. And the parallax side of the saddle of the Razor 3, I felt was really well done. The parallax wasn't too stiff, it wasn't too loose. It stayed put when I set it. I really liked it. The windage, elevation, and the feel of those two was really something that was one of my bigger sticking points. Do the hash marks line up?
That's on the, so later he says it's on the windage elevation turret. So the way Vortex does the turrets, Gen 3 is an improved method of what they did with the Gen 2, but the actual sighting in is done in a frictionless way. There's an inner turret and an outer turret. The outer turret lines up perfectly, and the inner turret is allowing you to do your zeroing in a sub-click with sub-click accuracy, which is kind of important for some stuff. Right, so the hash marks on mine line up perfectly. The hash marks on, I don't know, 40, 50, 60, I don't know how many. I looked at all lined up perfectly just because that's how their turrets work. It's a very, very different design from everybody else.
Yeah, same for me. They do line up very well. Another thing that I noted to Vortex, but this was before I found out that you could actually remove the locking feature altogether. But so when you raise the elevation turret, there is a hash mark on the body, an indexing point, so that you know what what click you're on. But when you raise up the turret, on that part that gets exposed when you raise it up, it's a rather wide gap. I felt it was actually a bigger gap than on the Gen 2 Razor. And so I wish they would have extended the indexing line like all the way through that gap, if that makes sense. Just because the few some of the competitions that I ran it in, when I was trying to quick dial, the one thing that saved me is the spacing, because it's 10 mils per turn. But it was one of those where I had to like take a second to look at it and say, oh yeah, that is 7.5, that is 4.3, just because there's that gap. And in quick references, I want to see things quick. So I wish that they would have extended that line. So I noted in my review that if I bought one of those scopes, and because Vortex, their warranty is amazing, I'd just take a white paint pen and just draw one on there myself, honestly. But in regards to comparing to the Mark V, so my Mark V, the turrets line up, the hash marks line up fine, except for the windage, because they have that weird retarded placement. I don't like it. It doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, it still technically lines up. It just doesn't look good, and it's kind of confusing, especially when you're trying to adjust windage quickly.
Yeah, I'm not bothered by it, but I never dial windage, so I don't care.
Yeah, yeah. Same thing with me. It's just when I'm zeroing it, I really have to stare at it and say, why did you do this to me? Like, you're just making it harder for me to zero this fucking scope, and it's really annoying. But what I will say in regards to the Mark V that's interesting that I actually don't like is, I don't know if my camera would really get it, but so when you're looking at the elevation turret, the body indexing line is not vertical, it's this way. So from when you're off to the side, if you're looking at the elevation turret but you're still behind the scope, essentially you're looking at it off axis, you can actually find yourself dialing on the wrong.
Yes, there is parallax between the hash mark and the turret.
Yes, and it's really annoying because
it's really retarded. Because of the way they do the saddle, they drew this. There's no vertical part for them to draw the hash mark on.
Yes, exactly. And I wish that they would fix that, because there's a couple times where I was dialing in the middle of a match and I'm like staring at it like, wait, did I dial like 0.1 too many or 0.1 like less than I was supposed to? And you have to actually like come off the scope and get centered behind it to make sure that it's correct. You can't still like do one of these where you're like still behind the rifle. Even when you're prone, you have to, it's just annoying. I don't like that.
Yeah, like one of the reasons I like the Reticle implementation and Steiner's IFS so much is that they give you an indicator where the turret is inside the scope, so I never have to look away. For me, that is one of the biggest things about all these electro-optic integration.
Yes, and so I sold my Revic a while back, but I did use it extensively, and for a first iteration from them, and not to go off on like a crazy long tangent, but for a first iteration of a scope that seemingly had never been like that type of scope, at least to my knowledge, had never been done before, with a internal display with all the different things that it did, I think it was pretty fairly well done. Now, mechanically, did I like the scope? No. I think the turret sucked. The glass was bad to me anyway. And things
mine
like
was
that.
not bad. It's basically Razor Gen2, but with some other crap added into the optical path, which makes it a little bit worse.
Yeah, exactly. So comparing it to a Razor 2 was what I did, and I noticed a lot more CA on it. I mean, I guess for the price point you're paying also for the integrated electronics, but yeah, it was worse than Gen 2 Razor glass, even though that's the most direct comparison. But we're really, and it's funny, it's ironic because you're not supposed to look at the turrets when you dial. You're just supposed to look at the heads up display, the internal display. But just the feeling of the turrets, at least on mine, were just absolute garbage. They were so mushy. I was like, if the battery ever dies in this thing and I have to use it like a traditional scope, it's gonna suck. It's real, and they made the numbers and the hash marks so small. You have this giant ass elevation turret, the size of the Eiffel Tower, but the writing on it is like you need a magnifying glass to read it. I'm like,
I did not like the markings on mine. The turrets were not that bad. They were not perfect, but not bad. Either way, Revic is supposed to have Gen 2 coming, hopefully, at this SHOT Show. So
yes,
it'll be very interesting to see if they do. I think in many ways that style of a scope is the way forward. Right, but I did like the in the scope IFS implementation a little bit more. But Revic was a better packaged thing. Both Steiner and Revic are improving their electro-optic integration. And I think it's going to be something. Going back to the Gen 3, right? So to the mechanics of the Gen 3. So the turret issue, as I said, has been resolved, and Vortex being Vortex, they will take care of you. One of the things you guys have to realize is that no company out there makes as many scopes as Vortex, and that goes for the Razor. So when Vortex orders the first large production batch, it is significantly larger than anybody else's large production batch. And sometimes when you try to make 50 of something versus 500 of something, or 1,000 of something, or God knows how many, things change and they have to adjust the design. That's exactly what they did. They didn't have to do anything with optics, didn't have to do anything internal. They did have to modify the design of the turrets. Not tremendously, I saw what the changes, but they did have to do it. For reference, when I once asked them privately how many Razor Gen 2s they made, and it's been used for a long time. When I heard the number, I just about fell out of my chair. I had no idea so many of these are out there. I mean, it's really quite remarkable. So I've got a question here from Rick Hamby, I think that needs to be addressed. Parallax and depth of field are two different functions. Are we misusing parallax? Do we mean the image appears clear over a greater distance, which is depth of field? So they are different functions, but they are related. If the scope has a lot of depth of field, you don't have to screw around with the parallax knob as much, right? Parallax sets the center point, well, almost the center point of your depth of field. If let's say you set your parallax to 300 yards, everything is going to be in focus from, I don't know, 250 to 350, or whatever depth of field happens to be. So 250 to 350 is what your depth of field is. And your parallax knob is what sets up. Parallax knob is generally a misnomer. It's really a focus knob. It's image focus knob, objective lens focus knob. But we all think of it as parallax knob because one of the apparent things it does, it dials down parallax. But if the rest of your scope is set up correctly, all it does is focuses the image on the reticle in the front focal plane. And the relationship is that in a scope like a tangent or a Razor Gen3, because the depth of field is so good, OLSZCO or 5 to 25 Schmidt, you do not have to mess with the parallax turret all that much when you're at longer distances. At closer distances, you have to, the closer you are, the shallower in absolute terms is the depth of field. So you have to mess with it all the time, right? As you go past, let's say, 200 yards on a tangent, if I need to shoot with a tangent, something a little bit far out, I basically twist the parallax somewhere and go shoot. What that means is that it's not going to be, if I happen to set it at 300 yards, I'm only going to be perfectly parallax 3 at 300 yards. At 200, I'm still going to be in focus, but not perfect. Parallax 3, parallax 3, excuse me. At 5, 600, I'm not going to be perfectly parallax 3, but parallax is going to be small enough that shooting on plates, I really don't care. In a really, really weird way, when you're trying to shoot paper, the smallest humanly possible group, this great depth of field is not necessarily a good thing, because the depth of field is so large that it's very hard to figure out where your perfectly parallax-free setting is, and you have to move your head around and all this sort of stuff. If a scope has a shallow depth of field, and that's one of the things you get with very high magnifications, and everything else in the scope is set up correctly, you bring it into focus, the sharpest focus, your parallax-free, go shoot. So for shooting the smallest groups, you don't necessarily want the greatest depth of field. But for shooting concrete targets of some reasonable physical size, like plates at different distances and transitioning between them, you want depth of field. And we also talk about it as forgiving parallax, because basically you don't have to mess with the parallax turret quite as much. Is it making sense?
Yeah, I like that. And again, so this kind of definitely goes back to use case and real world usage of these scopes. And when we try to give you guys suggestions, is you can measure all that sort of stuff, but to actually go and shoot targets and then realize how forgiving the parallax is in the moment is when you really start to notice it and really start to appreciate some of those things, versus a scope where it's like, oh damn, I've got my first target at 300, okay, here's my parallax, then I got to go to 600, okay, readjust parallax, then I've got to go to 800, readjust, back to 300, readjust. I mean, that's where you really start to notice some of these things in real world usage with these scopes, and the Razor 3 was super impressive in that aspect.
Correct. Another thing where depth of field really, really helps, if I'm sitting there trying to evaluate the conditions with let's say with my March 5 to 42, which I like quite a lot, one of my favorite scopes, depth of field is a lot shallower, resolution is amazing. It's very easy to figure out where the focus is, but it's very difficult for me to figure out what the wind is doing between me and the target, because a lot of it is out of focus. I have to adjust the parallax turret to some closer distance and kind of see what's happening over there. With a tangent, I'm just looking through the scope and I see everything.
Yeah,
but
and that's something that you'll see a lot of competition guys, especially, is they'll read the mirage on the fly in the middle of a stage. And so guys that have higher end optics like tangents and things like that, they can see that so much better, because you can actually, because the depth of field is so good, if your target's at 750, 800, but you can see the mirage at 300 and really tell spatially how different that is, you can really start to take advantage of that.
Correct. And there was until recently, there was no less expensive scope other than, I guess, the Minox that could really do this for you. There is a Gen3 can. Real quick thing, the 1 to 10 has a fixed parallax. Is this a deal breaker for you guys? No, I have two 1 to 10s, two Razor Gen3 1 to 10s. Fixed parallax is not really an issue for me for scope of that type. Right. I don't want to dig into that right now. With lower magnification, it's not that big of a concern. For dry practice, I guess it is, but for real world use, no.
Correct.
Anyhow, going back to the Gen3 and mechanics and how the mechanics compare. So the turrets on yours were not amazing. Mine are actually quite good, but the current production ones are a lot better. Parallax, Norbert talked about. Illumination seems to be reasonably well designed. One of the things I like about how they did the illumination, other than the fact that it locks, is that they did not illuminate the whole tree. I don't know if I will be able to show you this. with the scope. No, I need to get very close to the camera. I can do it with the red dots. What's illuminated is basically a large crosshair. Right? The long vertical and long horizontal, not the thick bars, no, thin lines. And when I did a bunch of testing in low light, one of the things I found is that one, it's bright enough for during the day. If I have a very dark target, I'll be fine. But in low light, when I turn it down all the way down on 1, and I look at it in the lit room, I actually can't see anything. To see anything, I actually have to be in low light. And even then, maybe barely. And that's how the reticle illumination should be calibrated. In low light, I can set it to a point where it does not disturb my night adapted eyes at all. Okay. I don't know if you spend any serious time in low light.
So again, California, hi. Yeah. The night vision over here isn't really a thing. So the best I can do is go outside when it's dark.
with a precision rifle and the rifle scope. That goes great in Los Angeles.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely ideal. It's the perfect thing to do on a Saturday night, trust me. So, but from a number of guys that I've talked to, it works really well when you actually have clip-ons and other things like that.
I've used it with a clip-on, but with a 6X low end, most commercial clip-ons are not ideal. They work, but ideal. The high-end thermal clip-ons do really well with the scope. So here's a question from Mr. Prone Wolf. How does it stack up to the zero comp 8x8-40?
Oof. Okay, so in case of anybody noticed, this is a very long ZCO. That is an 8-40. It's actually longer than the tangent, not by much, but it is. So full disclosure, I had to return the review sample back to Vortex of the Razor 3 before I got this 8-40 in, so I wasn't able to do them side by side directly at the same time. What I will say, though, is that the Razor 3 is fresh enough in my mind, and I shot it enough last PRS season that I'm still very mentally familiar with it. And I will say this. So an interesting thing happened the other day at a match that I was at. It was actually 2 weekends ago, where essentially a cloud just fell on top of the range on everything past 400 yards. I mean, I had guys out there with the new Swaro NL Pure 12x binoculars, guys with the 15x56 SLCs, I had my Hensoldt out there, guys with the BTX Swaros, and anything past 400. I mean, you could barely see it even with those high-end optics through the fog. I mean, it was that thick, right? And so there was a target that I was supposed to shoot at, it was like 730 something, a little over 700 yards. And so it was a long story short, the first target that you're supposed to shoot was at like 400 and something. So I could see that one no problem. I transitioned to the 700 and some odd target, and I just saw gray, right? Because there's this cloud, and one of the guys behind me was spotting on the 12x NL Pures, and he could barely see the outline of this circular target at 7 something, and I was behind the 8-40 for a while, and then I barely started to see it. Like, I guess as my eyes adjusted, I could barely see it. And so I said, fuck it, I'm going to send a shot. I sent the shot approximately where I thought it was, and then we saw it when it hit the plate and the plate started swinging. We could see the swinging plate through the fog. And that actually surprised me quite a bit, because we had other guys out there with other scopes, 7-35 attackers, Razor 3s, a lot of Leupold Mark 5s that literally could not see that target. They literally walked off the stage saying, I can't shoot that target because I cannot see it. And so I asked a couple guys if I could jump behind their rifle aiming at that target to see if I could see it through their optics. And I felt like that was very on the fly, but a decent representation of like this 8-40 optically is pretty legit. Yeah, the Mark V, I couldn't see the target at all on other guys' scopes. Now, obviously, I didn't mess with their diopters or anything like that, but I knew where it was. I couldn't find a single shred of trace of the target, not even the outline. The Razor 3, admittedly, I couldn't see it. I looked through one and I was like looking, but I couldn't see it. And you know, do I have a exact ranking? That's tough. At 40 power, this thing resolves like incredible amounts of detail. I hesitate to put it on a ranking because I haven't had it long enough to thoroughly evaluate it. I've only shot one match with it so far, and I've had it out to the range twice, and neither one of those were for pure optical testing. First time was zeroing the gun. Second time was just a quick practice session. So initial impressions, it's going to be right up there in that 1, 2, 3 mix. It really is. Outside of the fact that, yes, the elevation, you definitely notice you have less. But
well, I mean, so to be fair, there are new scopes coming, right? So ZCO has a new 8-40, which is very nice. And since you have one, we'll find a way to do a comparison. Tangent's coming out with a 7-35.
Yes, and I'm excited for that.
Yeah, and they should have a prototype at shot. And once they have production ones, I'll get my hands on it. Schmidt has a 6-36. There is the Razor. So I'm sure we'll be able to find a way to put them side by side. I guess a simple question is that it's probably not quite as good optically as the 8-40. How far off, we'll have to find out.
Yes.
5-27 is optically, in terms of pure resolution stuff, probably slightly better than the Gen3. That would be my guess. But once again, it's close, so it stands to reason the 8-40 might be a little bit better as well. It's not an unreasonable assumption, but we'll make it a point to do a side by side. You want some free advice, Will? So for conditions like this, find, how old Russian scopes that had this little rubber eyepiece that would go, a rubber little thingy that would go on a eyepiece, and you look through it through the scope. Yeah, see if you can find one that fits your ZCO. Have it in your pack when you go to competition. So find a situation like that again. Put that rubber thingy on and look for the target.
Okay.
Through that, so that all of the straight light that comes from around the eyepiece does not get to your eye. You'd be amazed how big the difference is.
Okay. I will definitely look for one of those.
Or just find a piece of rubber, something of the right diameter.
Yeah.
Right, and just pop it on. It's interesting how much of a difference that makes. I'm kind of beginning to go through the comments, and I'll go to the beginning momentarily. Mr. Wes A goes, is it worth entertaining a comparison to the Delta? I was just so impressed by the 1-6 taking out competition with almost double the price. So the Delta Striker 4.5-30x56 that you're talking about is a really, really nice scope, but it's not a competition for Gen3 or Tangent or Z Comp. It's extremely compelling in under $2,000 price range. I think you've spent a little bit of time with Delta.
Yes, yes.
It's a nice scope. It's a legitimate nice scope. If you're looking at the Mark V, Delta should be in the conversation, although,
absolutely,
etc. But when you go to the real alpha class, this Delta Striker, as nice as it is not quite there. Right? There are no miracles in this world. I wish it was.
Yeah,
it isn't.
Yeah, just to address like the deltas in general, I would say they're a very, very nice, what I would consider tier 2. If Tangent, ZCO, Razor 3 are a tier 1, then you have, in my opinion, the Leupold Mark V sort of at the beginning of that, or that top end of that tier 2, and I think that the Delta is also in there at that sort of tier 2 level. Where there's just enough differences between that and some of the higher end ones where, outside of specific situations, they're just not as good. And that's not to say that they're bad. Trust me, I've shot my Mark V in plenty of competitions. I didn't miss any targets because I had a Mark V, But if you're really just going for which one is objectively better, yeah, I would place that in the high end of tier 2.
Okay. So just to address this comment I found, not sure if the guy with the Vortex screensaver is without any biases. We all have our biases, right? And anybody who tells you they're perfectly unbiased is just not aware of their biases. I'm moderately certain the Vortex screensaver is for this live stream. He's sponsored by ZCO. So
yeah. Full disclosure, I have no affiliation with Vortex other than the guys are nice. But if they didn't put out a good scope, I'd also say that they didn't put out a good scope. The only reason that I have the Vortex up here is because that's the main topic of this live stream. If we were talking about Tangent or Burris or anything else, I'd have their logo up there all the same.
Thank you for the clarification. I'm not sponsored by anyone. I generally maintain cordial relationship with most brands. There are several that hate my ass. Don't really care. Generally Nightforce, Kala Swarovski, now ZCO, probably a few others genuinely despise me. I genuinely like ZCO scopes. I like attacker scopes. So yeah, I've been doing this for a very long time. If I maintain cordial relations with everyone, I'd be doing something wrong. What about the new Zeiss? So I assume you mean the Zeiss LRP S5. That is generally in the same performance category as this alpha level scopes that we've talked about. I've tested the 3-18 by 50. I have not tested the high magnification one. Have you had a chance to look at it, Will?
I have not, and that's one that was also interesting to me. But yeah, unfortunately, I haven't spent any time with either the 3-18 or the, I believe it's a 5-25 or
5-25 or something like that.
Yeah, it's in that general magnification range. I have not had a chance to look at either, so I really can't comment one way or the other than the Zeiss binos that I've had were very nice. So I would assume that
Yeah. So when I looked at the 50mm ones, I had a chance to have the ZCO 4-20 and the Zeiss 3-18 and several others. Not all at the same site, but I kind of did a fairly detailed comparison. Zeiss will be in the same conversation. It's probably going to be competitive with the Gen 3. If I were to make a guess, and it's just a guess, I'd say the Gen 3 is going to be a little bit better. Zeiss looked like it was really going after ZCO in many ways. It was pretty forgiving, had very good resolution. Field of view was a little bit on the narrow side. That was kind of the biggest knock against it in many ways, but it's definitely in the same conversation. I just don't know for sure where it would rank, and it would depend on how you value certain things. For me, field of view is quite important. And that was probably the biggest weakness of the Zeiss S5. Where Zeiss S5 is arguably the best, they did a diffractive reticle, so the reticle illumination is remarkably good with a very, very broad range. If you like to use reticle illumination during the day, S5 should be on your list. It was a really nice scope. The turrets were good. It was easy to get behind. But like I said, I think field of view is probably the biggest weakness.
Yeah, and one thing that I will note, again, I didn't have any experience with the Zeiss specifically, but the field of view on the Razor 3, I cannot say enough about. It was super impressive to the point where in a competition setting where normally I'd run, regardless of what scope it is, whether it's my Tangent or a Mark V or anything else, I normally run them about 15 power so that you have a good combination of being able to see details on target, but also field of view so that you can spot your impacts and misses and self-correct. I actually found myself running the Razor up closer to 20 power and still feeling like I had a good field of view.
Yeah, that was, and once you get field of view with forgiving eye box, that combination is what's most amazing about this thing. Billy, the cheap Vortex scope today smokes what we had in the 90s for way less than the cost. Amazing. I don't know how cheap, but generally, yeah, we live in a golden age of traditional rifle scopes. What we have now, not just from Vortex, from a bunch of different makers. So this Vortex Venom 5-25 by 56 for what, $500-600 doesn't have an illumination though. Front focal plane, good reticle, good parallax. Yes, made in China, to good quality, easy to get behind. Nothing like this existed when I started looking at this. It just did not exist, really. And then the Schmidt came out with the 5-25, and it changed everything. Before that, we had some boutique scopes from Schmidt, a few others here and there, mostly 4-16s, 3-12s. They were very, very good in many ways, well optimized. And then that 5-25 came out, precision thing happened, practical precision. Competitions happened, people started spending a little bit more money on these things, and it just opened such an incredible market. One of the, I will do a little bit of a sidetrack, and Will and I can sit here and talk about Tangents and Z comps and the Razor Gen3s and $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 scopes and all that. You can go buy a $1,500, $1,200 ticket, put a $500 Vortex Venom on it, and if you're a good shot, you can be competitive in many competitions. It is really quite remarkable how it's a couple of grand, still a lot of money, but for a couple of grand and some practice, you can be competitive within reason to guys. Hell, Will with a $1,200 ticket and a $600 Venom will beat me in any competition if I shoot his competition rifle with a Tangent data or whatever, right?
Yeah,
it will not hold you back.
Yeah, and to speak to that point, so somebody that we both know that's even drastically a better shot than I am is Phil Vallejo. And he actually he kind of took that misnomer of you need these high-end scopes to be competitive, and what he did, I believe it was last year, maybe it was a couple years ago, but long story short, he took a Tikka T3X in 6.5 Creedmoor, and the first scope that he put on it, he did a YouTube series with a Collis later, but the first scope he put on it was a Nightforce SHV first focal plane, which is like, I think, a $1,200 scope.
Yeah, it's a 4-14 by 50, I think.
Yeah, took that out, and no big deal, just won a couple matches with them, and that's fine, nothing crazy, but it just goes to show, you have a $1,000-ish rifle, and Tikkas make great rifles, by the way, but $1,000-ish rifle and $1,200-ish scope, and so all in all, you're in it, with a bipod less than $2,500, and he won a couple of competitions with it.
Well, to be fair, Phil is probably better with the fanciest setup, but he's like, if you're good enough, you'll be competitive with comparatively inexpensive gear.
Yeah,
something to think about.
Yeah, the value proposition of today's scopes in general, whether you're looking at, again, something like the Razor 3, which $3,000 is a lot of money, period, no matter which way you slice it, especially for something that for most people is a hobby. But it's kind of insane to say, but it is a real value at that price point. And if you get it for less than that, which you can usually get it on sale for less than that, is really just extra gravy. And that trickles down the line. The $1,500 for a Razor Gen 2, that's still a really good scope for $1,500. So,
Yeah, it's very, very good. So, Joel, I'm hearing reports that there's a tiny bit of fishbowl around the edges on the Vortex, a kind of distortion. Any truth to this? On low magnification, maybe. Most scopes, so when you set them on low magnification, do a little bit of that. Once we get past about 10, I don't think I see any of that. Anything that stood out to you, Will?
No, nothing that stood out to me. I will say that I didn't spend a lot of time with it at 6 power. So if that's something that would be more prevalent at low magnification, like the bottom end of 6x, then again, admittedly, I didn't spend a lot of time there because I don't have that type of scope to shoot anything at 6x. I mean, you can the reticle itself just basically looks like a duplex at 6x. Okay. And for any kind of meaningful shooting that I personally do, I'm at a minimum at 10 power, but usually right around 15, if not higher. So but I didn't notice anything, and I did pay attention to the edge-to-edge clarity because that was where I really started to see some of the scopes fall off. And again, I don't want to sound like I'm trashing it because in its own right, it is a good scope. It really is, especially for the weight for a full featured scope. But the Mark V on the edges was really one that sort of tanked compared to the Razor 3.
So I have long maintained that all of you PRS guys, they should be a couple of stages that you should completely unsupported offhand. Then you'll learn the value of low magnification.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, I just want to see you with your 2,800-pound rifle going like. So what happens on low magnification with most scopes? The exit pupil gets quite large, and your eye pupil, especially during the day, is fairly small. So you can accidentally position it sufficiently far off to the edge where you start picking up some distortions. They're just more prominent when the exit pupil is very large compared to your eye pupil. Virtually every scope has it to some degree. All right, what else is there? Okay, that's interesting. So somebody from UK quite a while back said, what are your thoughts on a Sig Tango 4 Gen 2 scopes? I've actually never really looked at them carefully. Any hands-on experience?
Not with the Tango 4. Once upon a time, I did have the Tango 6. I believe it was a 5-30 with the internal leveling thing that they did. And I meant to do a review on it, but mechanically, in terms of like fit and finish and feel, I'll be honest, it was so bad that I didn't even do it. It was a really frustrating thing. But so they have a locking turret that you pull up, similar to a Vortex, right? You pull it up to unlock it. But when it's in the unlocked position, there was a lot of like slop and wobble. Like you could go like this and it felt like it was going to fall off. So I contacted them and they said it's within spec. Like they said that there was going to be play because of the nature of the locking and unlocking mechanism. I'm like, okay, but it doesn't look like it's supposed to fall off. I don't understand what this is. The chromatic aberration was really bad in it. But anyway, I don't want to go on a tangent on that particular scope, but that's the only SIG I've ever looked at. And to be honest, I've never had any interest in any of their Tango line of scopes after that.
Yeah, I looked at the Tango 6 4-24 and the Gen 3 18. They were actually decent scopes, but they were not world beaters. I have seen a lot of sample variation, a lot of SIG scopes. I do like the LPVOs. I have no real experience with the Tango 4 Gen 2, so I'm afraid I can't really help you with that one. Sorry.
Yeah. And just for clarity, I don't want to sound like I'm completely bashing SIG because as you can see right here, these are the SIG Kilo 10Ks, which I absolutely do love the laser, but I also think that the glass is really bad.
Yeah, that's, well.
I mean, mine look like if I send these to you, Ilya, you will absolutely think that there is a blue filter on the front of these. They're so blue.
I've seen them. That's one of the reasons I haven't done the review.
Yeah, you will think. I tell everybody when you look through them, the laser is entirely impressive. Probably the best laser I've ever had. But you look like you're looking underwater. Like it looks like you're in the ocean.
So one of the reasons so many of my reviews lean toward the positive is that I basically pre-screen what I'm going to spend time on. If one of the kind of sort of brief sidetracks, this conversation Will and I are having is a result of lots and lots of effort. The amount of time and effort we spend when we do an evaluation together, independently, whatever, is really, really significant. So I go to SHOT Show, I look at different things, and I kind of pre-screen. Do I want to spend 6 months of my life on this or not? And if something does not look good to me right offhand, unless they can convince me it's just bad sample, I'm not going to spend time on it. Right? Because ultimately, it is more important from a standpoint of making recommendations, which is kind of what I do here. From a standpoint of making recommendations, it is more important to me to be able to tell you guys what you should buy or what you should consider, I guess not what you should buy, what you should consider, what should be in your consideration, than what shouldn't be, right? Because to figure out what shouldn't be, I need to cover everything. I don't have the bandwidth for that. But if I spend this time and effort and come up with a concrete list of reasonable recommendations that I can justify, that's actually, it doesn't mean I've looked at everything that's worth buying, worth looking at, but at least the ones I look at, I can stand behind. So the Sig Kilo 10K, yeah, I heard the laser rangefinder is amazing. I looked at it. I don't like it as a binocular, and I did not have any interest in reviewing it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I struggle every day with it, and I actually wanted to have a separate conversation with you about it because that's why I haven't sold those Leicas there, because those are the range finding Leicas, but the laser on those compared to the Sigs is not impressive. But the glass quality is two completely different worlds.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. I'm kind of going through the comments to see what else we have. I tried to cap these at a couple of hours, and we are right at 2 hours, so it's not a hard limit, but I just want to make sure that we don't miss anything worthwhile. All right, okay. Mr. Alex Richardson was here. I'm sorry I missed him. I think he's left. Alex is a good friend. He's over from New Zealand, a really interesting guy. I've been actually trying to get him to come on a live stream with me sometime to talk a little bit about the gun laws in New Zealand, how things are over there. He's a good shooter. We'll do a joint one at some point. I don't know if Alex, if you're still here. If you still are, I'm happy you chimed in, and if not, well, we'll chat at some point. Let's see. That's kind of interesting. What are your thoughts on Leupold Mark V HD versus Vortex Razor LHT for target shooting and hunting? You want to touch on that? You want me to do it?
Well, I'll just give my quick thoughts on it. So the Razor LHT, I'm assuming he's talking about the newest one. I think it's a 4.5 to 22.
Correct.
It's very nice, but there's a few things that I personally don't like on it. One being the fact that I believe it's only 5 mils per turn. I'd prefer 10. 6. Okay. 6 mils per turn. I'd prefer 10. And there, if I remember correctly, there's no second rev indicator. And
I don't think so, no.
Yeah, I don't believe there's a second rev indicator. So if I only have 6 mils per turn, I definitely want a second rev indicator, at least for the shooting that I do, because there's a decent amount of targets where I'm between 6 mils and I guess the second revolution would be 12, but a decent amount where I'm between 6 mils and 10 mils. That's a good portion of targets there. So me personally, I would probably pick the Mark V as an overall package, because now, save for the fact that you cannot get the PR2 illuminated, which to this day irks me, and I just do not understand. I have talked to so many people at Leupold, just please illuminate the damn thing. I don't want more.
And put it into the small one, 3.6 to 18 by 44. It's begging.
Yes. For it. So I did hear that is coming at some point very soon.
Next century, yes.
But probably not illuminated again. So I don't understand. Don't give me excuses as to why you can't do it. Just do it.
Well, they clearly have illuminated Mark V scopes, right? It's clearly doable.
Yes,
they have
exactly.
PR1 illuminated in the same way. You don't have to illuminate the whole thing. Illuminate just the main crosshair.
Yeah. So I guess that would be for the hunting side of your question. If that's a factor where you hunt nighttime or low light and you do feel like you need illumination, then yeah, I think the LHT wins. For me, being in California, hello. All of our hunting is first shot legally that you can take is 30 minutes before first light, so sunrise, I guess, or so really we're not allowed to do any night hunting. So illumination is not as big of a factor. But overall, I prefer, so the Mark V 5 to 25 is a 30-ounce scope or just under 30 ounces. So really lightweight for what it is. And the 3 to 18 is even lighter.
27 ounces. 26.
Yeah. And so it's light enough. Is it as light as the LHT? No, but it's light enough that it's not a 40-ounce optic or 45-ounce optic like the Razor 3. and it has a reticle that I like in the PR2. It has 10 mils per turn with a second rev indicator and a zero stop and all those features that I would personally pick that for the type of shooting that I do over the LHT. But I could very easily see somebody going the other way because it's lighter.
You're about to.
Yeah, exactly. It's lighter. It comes with illumination, and maybe you don't need to go over 6 mils per turn that often. So
exactly. So if hunting is in the conversation, I'd probably lean toward HDLHT. If it's more of a competition scope, unless there's a weight limit that you need to sneak under, then Mark V is a better scope. And that's not strictly speaking very competitive because HDLHT is a $1,500 scope and Mark V is if you find one illuminated, is $1,000 more. Except the one you really want with the PR2 reticle is not illuminated.
yeah. So no, yeah. So
yeah, it's a double facepalm, right?
Yeah, I think in short, the long and short of this is there's no perfect scope, and it's just frustrating.
Yeah, exactly. So Mark V is very, very good. We crapped on it a little bit because it's not as good as the Gen3 and as the very expensive Tangent and Z-Comp. But it was not as good as Tangent and Z-Comp, I didn't care that much. It's a lot less expensive. But it's not as good as a Gen3, and the illuminated Mark V kind of gets into that same price range. It's a problem for the Mark V. But Mark V is much lighter, and if weight matters, and for competition use, you can get into your weight limit for an RL Hunter or whatever. With the Mark V, it's a very, very good option. It's a nice scope. But if you can't, the 5-25 Mark V is just over 30 ounces, actually 31, I think. And the 3.6 to 18 by 44, the tiny one, compared to speakers, 26.5. And the Razor HDLHT is 21.5. It doesn't have as much adjustment range. It's designed to be a hybrid design, crossover between hunting and competition. Right? If you're not hunting with it, and you extra, 10 ounces or something like that, doesn't make much difference. Mark V will do more for you. It's a more feature-rich competition scope. Aside from the reticles, illumination, but sorry, I keep on getting back to it because it's retarded.
Yeah,
it's just so retarded. And I know a bunch of people at Leupold, and I told them this is just retarded. I hope they do something about it. But HDLHT is cheaper, lighter, and the biggest real downside is no second turn indicator. And for hunting, I don't really go past 6 milliradian a whole lot. And from a longer range use, I do, and I've learned to deal with it. I do see where Will is coming from, and it really fundamentally comes down to how much reticle illumination and a lightweight matter to you. That's the compromise. Well, and a little bit of money.
Yeah. And questions like that is what we whenever Ilya and I get together, that's what we try to bring you guys is opinions based on actual and recommendations based on actual use case. So he's obviously used and owned or owns a LHT. Yeah, an LHT. And do you still have the Mark V that somewhere in there? Probably.
Shit, I have no fucking clue. The Tangent.
Probably.
March. Tangent. I don't see one from here. Maybe. I don't know.
Probably in the box somewhere. And I mean, I've got my Mark V sitting right there. So when we come up with these things, even though our opinions kind of differ a little bit, it's both from the way that we would in reality be using these scopes. And I think that's one of the things that you guys as the viewers really have to kind of take into account is not how we use it, but how are you going to use it? And then really just drill down some of the things that we note and say, oh, that applies to me, that doesn't apply to me. And hopefully that'll get you guys
into this. But that's also why it's so difficult for you to get a yes or no answer from us on most things.
Yeah.
Because it's conditional, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So do you have any recommendations for 2 to 10 or something in that range? That's a very underserved niche, I'll be honest with you.
Yeah,
Will doesn't go there that much. I actually use scopes like this a lot. And on the higher end of things, there really isn't a ton, partly because very high quality 3 to 15 or similar scopes almost displace that category. I'm hoping for some new interesting things there, and it kind of depends what price range you're looking at. I'm looking at I started testing this Japanese scope 2 to 12 by 44 Blackhound Emerge. It's not bad. It has some flaws, but it's not bad in the 1,000-ish range. But it's a little heavy at about 30 ounces. And once you get into that weight range, there are some 3 to 15s that are good. So in the primary arms, GLX 2.5 to 10 is not bad for about $700. Optical, it's not amazing. It's okay. Mechanical, it's very good. Blackhound Emerge 2 to 12 is Optimechanical is a nice scope. There are a couple of others here and there, but there isn't anything high-end, truly high-end, high-performing in that range. A lot of people still love the Nightforce NXS 2.5 to 10 by 42, and it's a great little scope if it was only like $600 less, because it's a comparatively old second focal plane design that still want like $1,600 for it, something. Would you pay $1,600 for that?
I mean, personally, I wouldn't, but I really actually
It's
now
a
that
nice
I think
scope,
about it, yeah, it is. It is hard to find these days. But the other thing too is I think I only own like one second focal plane scope at this point, just because most of my shooting I'm good with a first focal plane and prefer that way.
I generally strongly prefer front focal plane. The Blackhound Emerge 2 to 12 by 44 is a first focal plane scope. That's where my preferences lie. I think the Nightforce, if you're okay with a second focal plane, is probably your best option, but it'll cost you some money. Wonder if you have an opinion on Tract. I do, and I know Will has spent some time with one. Tract, like the Delta Striker we mentioned before, and a few other ones, is a really good option in this, like what we'll call tier 2 scopes. Tract is one of the better ones, backed by really good people. Well, you know John.
Yes.
And John, they're really good guys, really back their products. Quality control is very good. I like them a lot. I have at least 2 Tract scopes here. One is on my muzzle loader, and another. Oh, here's a Tract 1 to 8. Nice scope. Nice scopes. If you're shopping at $1,600 and $1,700 range, easily one of the better options. It'll be my top 2, top 3.
Yeah, absolutely. So shameless plug, but I did a review on one of the Tract scopes, their sort of PRS flagship model, on my YouTube, and I thought, again, is it a true alpha level scope? No, it's not. But it also doesn't cost that the same as one either. It's very nice for that sub $2,000 price point. And it's also a scope that could do well on Rimfire. And when I reviewed it, Rimfire was big, but not nearly as big as it is now, because I reviewed it, I think, 3 years ago now. But it could do very well on a Rimfire. If I remember correctly, I believe minimum parallax was like 20 yards or 25 yards.
It's less than, I think it was 25 or under.
Yeah. So
20 sounds about right.
It can do very well on something that if you want to get something for a rimfire and then match to your center fire, and instead of spending $4,000 on one scope, if you want to get two, that's a nice option right there.
Yeah. All right, next. Any thoughts or recommendations on 1 to 4 LPVOs for competition and service rifle matches? Honestly, I don't shoot service rifle, so this is not something that I know well. Leupold makes a 1 to 4.5, which is pretty good. I think there is I'm trying to remember, there was a company that does rifle builds, and they had Leupold make them a custom scope for service rifle. Purportedly was pretty good. This is not something I know particularly well because I don't shoot service rifle. I tend to use higher erector ratio or low power variables. Well, that's a good question for Will. Put you on the spot. Tract or Leupold Mark V?
Man, okay, so
how much do you want to hear again about the illumination on the Mark V?
Yeah, man. Listen, if I had to take one, Jesus Christ. Okay, honestly, if I had to take one, I'd probably take the Tract over the Mark V. But with the caveat of I'm not shooting something that has a mandatory weight limit because the Tract was heavy. I do remember that it was very close to Gen 2 Razor weight, which is over 40 ounces.
It was right around, it's like 39 or 40 ounces for the Tract.
Yeah. So and then again the Mark V, I'm assuming just the run of the mill 5 to 25 you're asking about is right basically at 30 ounces. So if I don't need that weight, say for like NRL Hunter to make the weight limit or something like that, then I'll take the Tract. The Reticle was really well done. I do really like the PR2, but it's not illuminated. I don't understand. Jesus Christ. You know, and then the other thing that has really bothered me that we touched on earlier in this live is the stupid ass body mark indexing markings for the windage and elevation on the I don't understand who sat in a meeting and said let's do it this way, and then everybody else said that's a great idea. I don't understand because none of it makes sense. It really doesn't. If you haven't seen a Mark V, the next time you're out at the range, because they're very popular scopes, so you can see them almost anywhere. Yeah, they even sell them at like Bass Pro Shops and Cabela's now in the glass case. Look at the windage knob. It's like at a weird, like, I don't, what is that, like 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock? I don't know. It's at some weird, stupid, like higher than center of the body point on the windage side. And then the elevation, that if you're looking off axis from the scope, like Ilya said, there's actually parallax between the body line because it's straight. There's no vertical post on the body line to index when you're dialing the elevation. So yeah, those two gripes they need to address for me on whatever next, you know, premier scope Leupold is going to do. They need to address those some of those issues. So I would take the Tract, and I'd also save a little bit of money.
Correct. So that's what I was going to say. They're not in the same price range. On pure merits, optical and mechanic, I think Mark V is slightly better than Tract, but not by much.
Yes.
And if you dial, you can get a Leupold Mark V with a PR1 reticle, which is a nice reticle. So you can dial elevation, hold for wind, or dial both. But I don't recommend dialing both because of that stupid ass marking that Will loves so much.
Jesus.
Yeah, but that'll cost you $1,000 more, if you're just a civilian, than the Tract. So once cost comes into equation, it's a pretty easy one. Get the Tract, unless you have military, first responder, law enforcement discount. Then you'll be surprised on how affordable Mark V becomes. And the version to get would be the 5 to 25 with the illuminated PR1 reticle, Milo MOA, depending on which one you like.
Yeah.
Okay, so the service rifle scope I couldn't remember. Mr. Hamby is right. The White Oak Armament has a service rifle scope that's purportedly quite good. Once again, you're kind of overpaying for the optomechanical quality because it's so specialized, but that's kind of what you have to do if you do a very specialized discipline. To follow up on the discussion of the 2 to 10 rifle scopes a moment ago, 3 to 15. So the best 3 to 15 on the market to date, still for God knows how many years, is a Tangent Theta 3 to 15 by 50. And I don't think there is a better 3 to 15 out there that I've seen to date. It'll cost some money. I still have mine, is serial number 57 on the very first batch. It's a TT315M. I have one with a 30 millimeter tube. It's 27 ounces. Has 6 mil radian per turn rotation. There is a revolution indicator. I've done nasty things to that thing. Most recently, a month ago, I killed an elk with that scope. Well, with a rifle, that scope is on. I didn't catch an elk and beat it to death with a scope, but I could probably do that. If somebody would hold an elk, I'm not in any condition to chase an elk down barefoot. But 3 to 15, yeah, that's easily the best. If you don't want to spend a lot of money, for like $800 or so, 700, whatever, you can get Vortex Viper PST Gen 2 3 to 15 by 44. That's kind of the cherry of the PST Gen 2 line.
Yes.
And that scope is nice enough where Until you get into like $1,000 more, you're not really going to find a 3 to 15 that's notably better. It's made in the Philippines. If you want to go Japanese, Brownell's MPO 3 to 18 by 50 is a nice scope for about $1,000. So it's basically PST Gen 2 or Brownell's MPO. There are a couple others that are very similar. There's a Reticle, that's the same. And then $1,000 mark. And if you want the best, spend some cash, get the tangent.
Yeah. One more recommendation, and I don't know if size or weight would be a factor in the application you're using it for, but if just in that general magnification range, the Razor Gen3 3 to 18, if you can find one, is
yeah, they were just discontinued. It's very heavy, but it's actually a very nice scope. If weight does not matter too much and you can locate one, it's a good option.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Thoughts on NX8 4 to 32 by 50 for target? I've seen them on sale in the same price point as a Delta 4.5 to 30. Thoughts?
Okay. So on paper, the NX8 4 to 32 by 50 looks great. And I'll be honest, every time I look at the spec sheet, I want to buy one. I really do. I like the lightweight. I like the reticle because the Mil XT, I've said it once and I'll say it again. Of any scope I've ever owned, the Mil XT reticle from Nightforce is my favorite overall reticle. It really is. So the fact that I can get my favorite reticle in a lightweight package with a good magnification range, a good sized objective, a lightweight, on paper, it looks great. And I really want to buy one every time I look at the spec sheet or I see somebody's rifle online until you have to look through it. Then I want a Delta.
It's not bad. Look, NX8 is not. So I was extremely negative on it. And 2.5 to 20, they changed something. The current ones are better. And the 4 to 32 is not bad. The basic problem is that it's a scope to get if you need lightweight.
Yes.
You need lightweight, there is that, although I think Razor HDLHD is a better scope in many ways. But it's a very viable scope if you're trying to save weight.
Right.
If you're trying to do competition type with it, get a Delta, get a Tract Toric, something like that. And also, if you're trying to do a lot of magnification, large objective lens really, really helps. So 50 millimeter on an NX8 does not help you when you're on 30 power. Really, I mean, it's okay. 56 doesn't sound like much more, but it's going to be considerably easier to use. Is it a bad choice? No, it's not bad. But I've said it before, and with Nightforce, if you really want a Nightforce, get one of the attackers. Like, if you bought into Nightforce marketing and you believe they're indestructible, you can club baby whales with it and all that from 3 miles out, so all that sort of stuff, great. Attacker is a Nightforce. You want SHVs are nice, robust scopes that are grossly overpriced for 25, 30-year-old designs. NX8s are decent for the weight, but they are all flawed in some way. And Attacker is where Nightforce does well.
Yeah, and so here's an interesting question that I would ask you, Ilya, is so the 4 to 32 specifically NX8s, I see them on, I'll just throw out a site like Euro Optic, for example. Price point wise, you're looking like $2,200, right? And of course, the main staple of the NX8 line is going to be the weight savings. It's geared towards, you want high magnification in a lightweight package. But what's to say, okay, in that same general 2,200-ish price point, would you not just take a full featured Mark V?
Yes, I would.
So again, it kind of leaves me in that awkward position of like, okay, well, if I already have a Mark V, or
unless you're planning to dial windage, and Will, back to you.
No, don't put that evil on me. No.
Hey, I remember I used to have a guy asking me about IOR at every live stream. Well, this one
Jesus.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so that's but that's fundamentally the problem that NX8 has. So Nightforce has great reputation for reliability, and it's generally deserved. They are very reliable scopes. Whether they're more reliable than other stuff, that's a different conversation to have. I think those claims are incorrect, but regardless, they're well-made scopes, and I think Nightforce made an NX8 to capitalize on people who don't want to pay the money for the attacker. The spec sheet, as Will said, looks amazing. And they are robust, they're well-made scopes. There's nothing that wrong with them mechanically, but optically, they're not as well optimized. Basically, they're decent, they're not bad, but it's a very, very competitive spot, right? Because for a little bit less money, I can go pick up a Delta Strike or Tract Toric. It's going to be a little bit heavier, but it's just going to perform better for competition use. For similar or a little bit more money, I can go pick up the Mark V with illuminated PR1 and non-illuminated PR. Oh.
So back to our regularly scheduled programming.
Yeah. Guys, I know we're driving you nuts with this, but like we've had this discussion about Leupold. It's like I like Leupold. They really think outside the box. They do clever things. They're good engineers. They make good stuff. Such an iconic company. And the reticles illumination in the Mark V is just a fucking mystery. The 28th wonder of the world. I don't know why you do this.
Guaranteed.
Yeah. So that's what puts an X8 in a difficult spot. It's basically for people who bought into Nightforce marketing but don't want to pay for the attacker. Okay. I know it's not the fair thing to say. But what about the S3? I assume that means Zeiss LRP S3. It's very new. I haven't seen it. I'm going to go take a look at shot. I'm going to probably try to get one for review, and we'll see how it does. It's a Japanese-made scope made by Light Optics Works. It appears to be based on standard LOW designs. I just don't know whether they're standard LOW Light Optics Works Japanese designs or whether Zeiss made modifications for themselves. I have a suspicion that the reticle illumination is Zeiss's, but I don't know if they did anything else. For example, the 4.5, 4 to 25 by 50 model that has a huge amount of adjustment. I mean, at least two companies that I can think of are bringing out Light Optics Works made scopes with the exact same configuration. I don't know if they're identical to Zeiss's or not. I just don't know. Right? It remains to be seen, and I'm going to try to figure that out in the coming year. Have you seen one yet?
No, I have not. And again, going back to earlier when somebody asked about the S5, I have not had a chance to look at any of the new Zeiss, more tactical model scopes. So again, I know that Zeiss makes really good glass. The binos that I had were amazing, but I have not had a chance to look at their newer rifle scopes. But they definitely are on my radar to look at, especially at shot. And if I can snag a review sample of either an S3 or an S5, I'd be more than happy to take a look at it and see where it compares. But I think overall it'll probably not be a letdown.
Probably not, but it depends. Like I said, if it's a standard Light Optics Works model with Zeiss illumination for more money than competition, it might be. Right. To me, so when I looked at the LRP S5, it was not a letdown at all. I really liked that scope in many ways. There are some strengths, some weaknesses, like with anything else, but I think it was a very compelling design overall. And I expect that S3 is going to be a decent, perfectly reasonable design as well. But until I spend some time with it, I can't really voice too many opinions. And I think I got to the end of the comments. And we are right at 2.5 hours. So I think we're going to wrap up. If there's anything Will and I haven't covered, please put it in the comments under the video, and I'm going to try to address it. I think this is going to be my last live stream for the year. I'm going to go take a few days off between Christmas and New Year's. I'm going to go visit sunny California, see what Will is complaining about.
Not the weather, that's for sure.
Yeah, the weather is great. Actually, I can't complain about the weather where I live. It's quite nice. But anyhow, thank you all. Thank you for sticking with us for this fairly long live stream. I really do appreciate it. And you all have a good night.